Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the DCU Soccer Podcast. Kind of a special episode here. Kind of going to do some different type of things, but I'm back with Daniel. Do you want to let the listeners know what they're in for?
Yeah, so everything's kind of gone into the garbage bin the last couple of weeks because of the COVID-19 virus. I'm sure everyone is pretty much living in the thick of it right now, and a big problem that this has really caused is that it's pretty much shut down almost every single sports league on the planet. And so the funniest thing is you've got, so many sports sort of outright canceling their events, but then you have professional wrestling going on with their shows, but they're doing it in empty either training centers or arenas. So it's like this weird kind of Lynchian performance art piece that's going on with all of that. So it's a weird thing we're kind of seeing with sports and just entertainment in general. Everything's kind of getting shut down. People are sort of being advised to stay home and reduce the spread of the virus. How are things over there in New York? We're in very different sort of areas, and so I'm curious how things are being handled in the more metropolitan spaces.
Yeah, so like Daniel said, I'm in New York, kind of quarantining. It's pretty interesting. We're effectively, I guess, on like some sort of lockdown, right? Like we are not really allowed to go out, quote unquote, unless you're essential workers or getting groceries or whatever. So I'm not really sure how they're like enforcing that or anything, but yeah, I mean, it's pretty intense. I've done a couple of grocery runs. We have food for a long time now, but tons of lines, like stuff not being available, but uh, you know, it's rough. It's kind of scary. A lot of people getting laid off too, especially this week, into next week. So it's kind of scary. Hopefully, some stuff starts to get better here. I'm not sure, right?
That's something that's escaped me. Like, are people losing their jobs completely because of this?
Uh, I'm not sure, but definitely effectively reduced hours, and if you're part time, But some people have lost their like some businesses have gone out of business. Some
Oh,
smaller,
true.
really really small ones. So there are those too. So it's just been rough all around, I think.
Yeah. Over here in the Midwest in South Dakota, you know, the numbers have been relatively low. We've had something like 14 confirmed cases. Don't think there's been any deaths or anything like that. But sort of the thing is, we're in a more spread out area. So as far as like the virus being transmitted easily, it kind of depends on where you're at. If you're in a place like Sioux Falls or Aberdeen or Rapid City, where it's a lot more, where the population is a lot larger, there's definitely that chance. But if you're in like a small town where there's about, you're talking the distance of like maybe 40 to 60 miles between towns, it's a lot, I suppose. Not as easy for the virus to spread, but we've been taking our precautions over here. The only problem is that yeah, like you said, this virus has really affected businesses around here. A lot of them are trying to stay open, or at least trying to skirt the essential staff sort of advisory. But yeah, our elected officials have actually had to come out and sort of scold like bars and whatnot to say like you need to shut down because this is a very real problem. So it's been a very confusing time. No one knows how long this sort of quarantine is supposed to last. For me, having just moved here, I was on the job search, and I had actually have been offered a position, but when this virus came in, it sort of put that on the back burner. So where I was expected to kind of start, so I was sort of slated to start this week. It's actually being pushed back for a period of time until things get sorted out. So a lot of unease, I suppose, with all of this going on. But we're here to put on this show and hopefully give some people a little time to just sort of think about something else, or return to normalcy with some soccer discussion. So with no soccer going on, where do we go from here, Ken?
Well, I mean, we should talk about, I guess, when is the earliest possible time for DC United and MLS to come back. They originally had postponed it 30 days, and it seems like now there's a new postponement, which will reach into May, so middle of May, it seems. So that's not a positive thing. It does give everyone more time to kind of keep this virus down. But like you were mentioning me earlier, also gives our players a little bit more time to heal. So that's, the smallest of silver linings that, we have at this point with these times.
And just as a fresher, where does DC United stand right now?
In terms of the Eastern Conference rankings?
I guess in Eastern Conference with the injuries and sort of, I guess for people who are just tuning in, where did we kind of last leave off?
Yeah, well, we are 1-1. Mm-hmm. We have won one game against Inter Miami, the expansion team, and we lost our home opener against Colorado Rapids, which was extremely disappointing. But yeah, we've only really played 2 games. We haven't seen too much. In that last game, Joseph Mora and Ola Kamara had hamstring injuries. I would expect at this point that they would be able to come back whenever the season starts again, whenever that is, because should be healed in the matter of a month or 2, right? So that's kind of where we are on that. Paul Arriola is still out with ACL tear. The prospects on that might feel a little better down the stretch, right? Like he might be able to come in for like the last month of the season maybe, or the playoffs more easily, potentially, right? You don't know, but another really small silver lining there in terms of how the world is.
Yeah. Now, what I've sort of heard is that there's discussions about sort of pushing the league back, where like the championship game would be played in December, but also there's thought that they could just sort of cancel out the games that would be happening between this period in May 10th. What do you think is like sort of the logical way to go, and what's sort of the best way to keeping the players' fitness and sort of strain in mind? What's the best course for the league?
Well, I think one of the reasons why you're seeing this delay and trying to push those games back instead of either potentially having them, I mean, at this point, this would not be probably an option either way, but in front of empty stadiums or something like that is probably revenue, right? So the league wants to play these games, that makes it a little difficult with the time here, putting it an extra, 40 days past the original 30-day or whatever postponement. You're starting to run into the point where like you're not going to be able to squish in so many games. So I'm not sure what they're going to end up doing. It kind of might make sense to me for them to kind of maybe edit how the season goes, right? Like maybe reduce the season length by a few games or so, and make sure that they're not playing too many games in quick succession. So that's just my thought.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, this is something that's absolutely unprecedented. The only thing I can really pull from is 9/11/2001, when the World Trade Center attacks happened, and I think there was a brief standstill with sports, but it eventually came back on, but we've never seen a span where every single league gets shut down for a whole period of time. And what I've, sort of been reading and listening to is that there's some significant financial, I guess, consequences coming from this. Is that, you've got Barcelona seemingly considering reducing the salaries of many of its players. A team whose salaries, I think the average is like $11 million per contract. So it's completely crazy. And then you've got smaller sort of mid-table to lower table teams, and then lower league teams that could be significantly affected by this. So what do you see as far as kind of the long-term effects from this? Is this something that's going to irrevocably damage soccer, or do you think we'll come back, sort of business as usual once things sort of blow over?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the data and stats on this virus might mean that we're not looking at a May restart. We might be looking at a 2021 restart, depending on if they can kind of fight this virus with any type of drug before the vaccine is widely available, right? So it might be the case where we end up not having a season at all, and I'm not sure how that would affect things. Probably very, very negatively, I would assume. But yeah, I mean, if it is the case where we're able to resume sometime in May or June, I think it has a pretty large impact that way too, right? Like, that's a lot of lost revenue. I think you're going to see for a long, long time reduction of crowds at these games. So you might see, maybe optimistically 75% of what you were seeing before, because scare of the virus, because we don't have a vaccine yet, right? So it's still going to be out there, and scare of that. But even if that was fightable, or the vaccine was available, economic damage from this has been pretty widespread already, and so it's kind of one of the first things to go, like events and sporting events and stuff. So yeah, it doesn't seem good. I would, if the games continue this season, I would expect to see a lot less people at them. But that might mean more TV viewers, I guess. So I don't know.
Right, and just in time for DC to get that new broadcast contract, sort of inked up. Yeah, this is just kind of crazy. But I'm sort of thinking, is it somewhat of a boon for the way that Major League Soccer is set up with, sort of the way things are structured financially with allocation money and salary caps? Would you say, or do you think that this league would be in better standing compared to other leagues that sort of have that more free market approach to things, with player contracts and salaries and all of that? What do you think about that?
I think MLS will be fine. I don't think we're looking at a situation where it will go out of business. At the end of the day, the federation has way too much money, and if worse comes to worst, I don't know if this is possible, but it seems like something where if it's really bad, it could be some sort of, I don't know, bailout situation or something, right? I don't know. But I think they'll be fine. Even if it doesn't come to that, I think the league will be fine. Yeah.
Well, that's reassuring. The thing is with soccer in America, it's always been a little bit shaky. I mean, with MLS celebrating 25 years, that's a significant accomplishment. And, we'll sort of kind of alluding to what we'll get into later in the show today. But, in 1996, that was DC United's first season, and they were one of the original 10 clubs to kick off that season. And, we are, sort of taking this time to look back on that. But, before that, you had the North American Soccer League and then the American Soccer League that sort of popped up and folded sort of, within maybe 5 to 10 years, when they sort of started off hot, then they folded, and then the American Soccer League wasn't even sanctioned by the U.S. Soccer Federation or FIFA or anything like that. So DC had a team in that realm, the Washington Diplomats, but the Major League Soccer was really sort of where DC got kind of like that major sort of backing as far as like the federation goes and FIFA is concerned. So do you want to jump right into that? Do we want to talk about that inaugural 1996 season?
Yeah, let's do it.
So so I guess before that, what would you say is like your earliest memory of DC United?
Yeah, well, it's going to be past 96 because I was too young for this season.
Right.
I do remember probably the earliest memories are in like 2000, 1999, vaguely, 2000, 2001. Definitely, I have a lot of memories from 2004 for various reasons. I was a little bit older then, and then that was a really important year for the club. And yeah, I mean, I do not remember.
Did you grow up in the DC area?
Yeah, so I'm from Maryland, so yeah, I would go with my dad all the time. And so yeah, we had like some seasons we would go pretty often. Some seasons we had like half season tickets down to RFK. But yeah.
Yeah. I have to say, being someone who grew up in the Midwest, my earliest memory of DC United isn't necessarily anything connected with the team itself, but sort of reading about MLS starting and just sort of being interested in that. And I think like my earliest memory specifically of DC United is when they signed Freddie Adu, who was sort of like the youngest American playing in MLS. I think what was it? I think he was like 14, 15 years old or something, and that was a major thing. And he was kind of listed as like the next big thing in soccer. And unfortunately, things didn't quite go that way for him. But for me, that was growing up in the Midwest where soccer is not a big deal. That was sort of the first whiff that I caught of MLS. But yeah, sort of it was fun kind of looking back on that season and seeing how things went for the club. If there's anything we can kind of take solace in, sort of looking at the way things are going so far this season, 1996 was a really rough start for DC. Did you read up anything about that?
Yeah, no, totally. There was a couple rough spots during the season which had them not doing. I mean, by today's standards, I guess, finishing. I think they finished 16-16 win-loss because there was no ties back then. They did the shootouts, quote unquote shootouts, I guess, which they had one win off of that, I believe. And yeah, I mean, by today's standards, that doesn't seem really good at all. But
right.
Back then, I mean, that's enough to get you in the playoffs.
Exactly. And yeah, a respectable position, I think, in the Eastern Conference. I think they were third or second or something like that, or they were sort of like in the middle
second
of that.
In the East.
Okay, so they had solid footing. I mean, those were days, we had 10 teams in the league, so sort of like I think it was like the top 4 that made it in, and then the last team didn't. So it was a different sort of landscape. And now today with what was our teams at now? We've got 24. Does that sound right?
I think it's a little more than that. Feels like it anyway.
It's a lot of teams, and then I think it's like 7 spots.
26 teams.
26 teams, and I think 7 spots per conference. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. So, it's you can sort of look at the health of the league just seeing that with how much the league has expanded, and what's interesting is how much those teams kind of became their own imprints of their communities. One interesting article I came across was about the 1996 home and away kit for DC, and they had Nike was sort of like the de facto jersey makers for the league. In fact, they were sort of like the de facto branding for the teams as well. There was an article on Major League Soccer where they were talking about those initial teams and how DC United sort of had the best kit of that selection of teams, where you had a lot of squads with really garish looking kits. DC had a more subtle black and white and then red and white outfit for their away matches. So did you catch anything about that, or did you see that article?
Yeah, I think you linked me to that one. I mean, these kits are pretty legendary, honestly. I mean, definitely known for being one of the best of those original, not being, crazy, totally crazy ones like some of them. But yeah, I mean, I have one of the away kits still, and
Oh, that's nice.
with that I think they still had that MasterCard on the back and everything.
Yep.
Just crazy. I mean, but yeah, I mean, it's also one of the things where like that kit totally, totally holds and to this day.
Now, I know we sort of discussed having some fun facts. I don't know when we'll sort of fit those in the show, but I guess one I want to kind of like throw out there because this was fascinating reading that article, learning that Peter Moore was the original designer of the DC United 1996 home and away kits. Now, he may be familiar in some circles as the man who created the Nike Air Jordan Jumpman logo. He also created the 3 bars for Adidas, and more in my realm or in sort of an interest, he was sort of like the president of marketing or whatever for Microsoft Xbox when they launched that, and he was he was involved with that from Xbox to the 360 to to wherever he is now. But he has interestingly enough, had some significant footprints in a lot of different industries, and I thought that was really interesting to know that he was the one who made that kit, and that's based on the fact that Kevin Payne, who was sort of like one of the original founders of DC United, he very much sort of rejected the way Nike wanted to brand the team. And originally, DC United was supposed to be the DC Revolution, but he absolutely rejected that, saying that the community was not going to embrace that. And interestingly enough, it wasn't based on the American Revolution, but the Beatles song. So
Right.
it was sort of, you had a lot of, how do you do, fellow kids, sort of efforts coming from Nike trying to appeal to sort of like a counterculture sense with Major League Soccer. Instead, DC United wanted to keep things real, clean, and classic.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I was reading something about this earlier too, where I think the DC United name really fits. I mean, we're seeing it even to this day. It's still really good. We have those like marketing campaigns like Unite the District. For a long time there was efforts about United stuff with the DMV, so it really fits. It really works for the area, and it works on multiple different levels. It's the capital of the United States. It works really well. And so I'm pretty glad that it didn't end up being something like that.
Yeah. And so, sort of getting back into kind of like the soccer side of things, what were some of those, original 96ers? What are some standout names on that roster?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the biggest one was that when they had Marco Echeverri, obviously El Diablo, who was there
Yeah.
for a while, won a lot. Jeff Agus, of course, American. Raul Diaz Arce. I think they got him in the draft, actually. I think. I don't know. I have to look that up. Eddie Pope, of course. Those are the big ones. And then obviously John Harkes, who I think was the captain as well, at least for some of those games that we're going to talk about.
And he was a guy who kind of firmly sort of planted himself in the Premier League, and so he was extremely established coming into MLS. And interestingly enough, in that first game, DC United faced off against the San Jose Clash, and on that team was Eric Wijnaldum. I thought that kind of blew my mind, and he was a big star coming from the Bundesliga.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that was a lot of the talk around this first game, which was also the first game of MLS ever in San Jose there, which unfortunately we did end up losing. But yeah, that was like the matchup that they were all talking about, before the game, I guess probably in the marketing as well.
And it was, like I said, a really rough start. I think, after that game, I think they had the Columbus Crew, and they lost to that. And then they didn't score, and DC didn't score until their third game, I believe. I think it was against the Tampa Bay Mutiny. Am I correct in saying that? If my
That is a team. I would have to look at the.
That is a team. Yeah, DC United didn't score until the third game, and then they still ended up losing. And then they went 0-4, and then they finally sort of recovered after that. But it was a very up and down season. So I guess with us having sort of like our disaster or semi disastrous start to the year, things have been worse for the team, and they've come back and done good things.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, even in that first game, like I mentioned, we did lose, but it was such a momentous moment for American soccer, American sports, really. So I thought that that was really, really important, and I spent a couple minutes. I didn't have too much time today, but rewatching that first game, and it's really interesting. It's on. I think it's literally like on YouTube or something. So I'll put a link in the description. You can check that out. But I thought that was really interesting. It's kind of funny seeing people from the 90s in general. So, but playing soccer in those baggy kits. But yeah, I mean, another cool thing about that game is that the FIFA president was actually there because, of course, they had asked the United States to start this league basically. Because of the 94 World Cup. So he was there and he watched the game. So I thought that was kind of a cool thing that people might not know.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it was super interesting just seeing, how excited people got about it. It was, for DC United's first home opener, they played in front of a crowd of over 30,000. And that was at RFK, and that was when RFK was a little more in its heyday, I would say, compared to how it is in recent time. But 30,000 in that, or over 30 in that first home opener, and then it kind of petered off after that, and then leveled out to 15,000. That was the average attendance throughout the season. That start definitely didn't help the team, but it's super cool seeing that people got really excited for this league when it started up.
Yeah, I mean those numbers are good. Even they're really good. Even in today's league, right?
Yeah.
But to your point about RFK, I would say it still was old even then. It's because
he was so old, yeah.
I think that was the year that the Redskins actually moved out. I think so. RFK, it shows how old that stadium being old even in the mid '90s.
Mhm.
how run down and stuff it was, and yeah.
Yeah, it's gosh, I just feel particularly lucky that I was able to, catch the tail end of that. I know we've had discussions, sort of about our RFK memories, but uh, gosh, it's just wild kind of looking back, like you said, at those old highlights and seeing the stadium like it used to be. It's there's a gladiatorial quality to it, especially if you were walking up to the stadium, either from that East Capitol entrance or if you were coming in from Lot 8, you just got a certain feeling from it. I really love Audi Field, but every time I approach that stadium, you just kind of got a little bit of goosebumps, especially if you were coming in with Barra Brava through that lot 8, sort of like that overpass that goes through, and then you got the guys who light up the smoke bombs, and you just start marching through there, and you got the drums going and all of that. There was an atmosphere there that was incredible.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, RFK was something. I still kind of miss it, and I mean, even walking like yeah, walking through it was like this is just ridiculously large. Um,
Hmm.
but let's go back a little bit to some roster stuff. So that's a lot of the main people. I also want to talk a little bit about Jesse Marsh being on the team. Of course, he's now coaching. Um, uh, Salzburg, I think, in the Austrian Bundesliga.
Yeah.
And of course, Jaime Moreno, which I don't think I mentioned somehow, was also on there. But yeah,
That team had no. There were that team was full of ballers. Even mentioning Sean Medved, who was a really really solid midfielder. That team was very much stacked, and they were just very very good. You want to talk about legends, like that whole team was full of them.
yeah. I mean, there's tons that we're probably not even gonna have time to mention that are still people you hear about or are on coaching staffs or some are in the Hall of Fame. So it's kind of crazy. Like you kind of want to like compare to the rosters of today, and it's like there was no DP rule or anything, but this was a pretty intense roster.
Yes, exactly. And we didn't even mention Eddie Pope in all of that either.
Yeah,
So
totally.
that's
Yeah.
that's what that's where we're going with that. Like those are solid names. And then not only that, but the team was also managed by you know Bruce Arena, who is a well known figure in Major League Soccer and on the national team stage.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, that's always been interesting. I was looking at pictures of him, like on the sideline, and he looks so much younger. Uh, but yeah, I
so
mean,
so many people did, yeah. It's tough to think that that was, nearly 30 years ago, but, here we are, 25 years later. That's really crazy to think about.
do you want to move on to our next topic, which we talked a little bit about how the season went? Well, we were 500 basically with win losses at both 16, but we did end up making the playoffs. Our postseason looked a lot different than our regular season.
Yes, so in the postseason, DC actually had some really dominant performances. And so looking back, um, I know. Okay, so in the conference semifinals, we did have a tight one against the New York, New Jersey Metro Stars, and with the first game was tied 2-2, 6-5 on penalties, and then DC United ended up winning the other two games 1-0 and then 2-1 to then move on to the conference or to the conference finals.
Right, right. And there we met back with the Tampa Bay Mutiny, which, as we talked about earlier, is a team.
Was a team.
Well, yeah, I guess was a team. That's correct. Yeah. No longer, long time ago.
Well, now I have to wonder if the Tampa Bay Rowdies, if that was somewhat remnants from the Tampa Bay Mutiny, or if that was something that sort of came up completely separately. I'd be curious to know that. I mean, I'd be curious to kind of know how sort of that 1996, with managers and players, where everyone kind of ended up at various places and what happened to a lot of those teams. It's kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah, and I mean they were top of the Eastern Conference this year in '96. So even on their roster, they had a lot of people you'd recognize as well. But I must have imagined that going into this conference finals, we would have been a little bit of the underdog, considering how dominant the Mutiny was in the Eastern Conference. But we ended up getting through there, obviously, because it's obviously.
That first game was a 4-1 shellacking. So DC United completely ran away in that first match, and then in the second leg, they ended up winning 2-1. So 6-2 on aggregate, not a bad way to sort of enter the MLS Cup final, and that was against the LA Galaxy. And So you said you watched the first game against the San Jose Clash. Did you catch the highlights or the game for the Cup Championship?
I've seen in the past, and I think my dad has it on VHS somewhere, but which I've
That's
seen
amazing.
in the past, but I did not see it today. No, I didn't look that one up.
Yeah, so maybe you probably remember it visually, but it was at a neutral ground and in Foxborough, Massachusetts, of all places. And this was on October 20th, 1996. And let me just kind of run through a couple cultural touchstones that were happening at that time. That weekend, the number one movie in the U.S. was Sleepers, which was a Robert De Niro vehicle, which also featured Brad Pitt, Kevin Bacon, and Minnie Driver, sort of a crime drama. But I've heard of that movie, but never actually saw it. And then the number one song. Did you take a look at that on the show notes?
Yeah, I see you have the Macarena.
The Macarena by Los Del Rio. And then the highest rated TV show for that year was ER, with a score of, I think it was like 21.2, which I think equals out to around 20 million people watching that show. So, those are a couple of the sort of big cultural landmarks of that time. But the MLS Cup was a game between the LA Galaxy and DC United. And so with the way DC kind of came into that game, they had a very sort of different look. It was a rainy, mucky day up in Foxborough. And so, going through the lineups, LA Galaxy fielded Jorge Campos, Robin Fraser, Arash Noamus, Mark Semioli, Greg Vanny, Chris Armas, Mauricio Cienfuegos, Kobe Jones, Jorge Salcido, and then Eduardo Hurtado, who was a baller for them, and then Harut Karapetian. LA came out, like I said, with Eduardo Hurtado. He scored the opener, a really nice delivery, from sort of like the corner of the box into him, where he was kind of just right, sort of near that six field box or 6 yard box, headed in a solid goal to start it off. And then it was very back and forth between DC and LA. It was when you talk about like sort of a rainy day, it typically creates a slick surface. Well, this was more like playing in a bog. And actually, right in front of the goal on each side were like these massive ponds that were forming. So anyone who got right into the thick of the box, they were pretty much having to contend with defenders and then also just with this mucky swamp and having to run through that. So, it was very much back and forth. And then another goal didn't happen again until the 56th minute when Chris Armas scored again for LA Galaxy. And I think at this time, a lot of the DC faithful were feeling a little dejected. And it wasn't until the 73rd minute when Tony Santa scored the first goal for DC United. And then Sean Medved followed up at the 81st minute. And then Eddie Pope in sort of like the extra time. And this was, if you want to talk about how different the league was at that time, they did shootouts during the regular season, and then they added sort of like that extra time golden goal, which eventually was scored by Eddie Pope on a really nice header. And I think, for a defender, that's a nice feather in the cap to sort of win that first MLS Cup for the team as a defender. So, talk about a team that just showed a lot of grit. So, that whole championship game was kind of like a microcosm of their season. A really rough start, but they battled back and were able to win the whole thing.
Yeah, no, totally. I did see that there was, a lot of storm, like it was a big storm and there was a lot of wind. In addition to that really bad rain for not only on the game day, but I think before the game a couple of days too. But yeah, I mean, even looking at this LA Galaxy lineup, I mean, there's tons of names there that, are still around. I think most people would recognize a lot of them, including Robin Fraser, who I believe just beat us as a coach of the Rapids. So
that's true. That's right. Yep.
So yeah, it kind of all comes back, right? But yeah, I mean, also obviously Chris Armas, Greg Vanney, all these guys, he's still around doing stuff. Pretty popular people in U.S. soccer.
Kobe Jones, I know he does analysis, so he's still very much involved in the sport. So yeah, that's just super cool to see all the players that were involved at that time. And speaking of 25 years later, it's awesome to see that DC has really given this team their recognition, particularly with Jaime Moreno showing off the new kits this year. And then you have the sort of Hall of Tradition, and a lot of the things that they're doing at Audi Field are giving a lot of recognition to this squad. So yeah, that's just fantastic. That they've been doing that.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, this is pretty interesting season. The games with those shootouts are always funny to look back. They get a lot of hate on Twitter, which is really funny whenever people post videos of them or whatever. But I wanted to also talk about two fun facts just really quickly to go back a little bit. We actually have two MLS firsts in this 96 season, probably more actually, but these ones are of note. In the April 13th game against Columbus Crew, which we lost 4-0, it was the MLS first own goal against us. So that's a fun one. On the other side, we had MLS's first hat trick on May 15th, also against Columbus. So that was, kind of interesting stuff. Some firsts against the same team, which is interesting. But
Yeah, so then just a few days after that, DC United also claimed another first, and sort of a first, kind of in a more elite uh, air.
Yeah, we won the double that year. We got the U.S. Open Cup as well. It was pretty interesting. We also basically didn't, we weren't in the first, selection of MLS teams to even be in this tournament. Los Angeles Galaxy was supposed to be in our place, but they kind of left the competition citing scheduling issues, which is kind of an
Oh,
interesting fact.
that is interesting. I had no idea, even in reading this, that kind of escaped me. That's huh. Inter- you have to imagine how much people were kind of like you know figuring it out as they went, or if only you could have kind of been sort of in the commissioner's office, or sort of at MLS headquarters, or sort of in the boardrooms at these different teams to see how people were kind of approaching the season and how things were working out. Man, that would have been. You'd imagine someone's probably written a book about it, but I can't really name anything coming from that era.
A lot of unknowns, a lot of things that are happening for the first time in a different scale, right? So I wonder if they regret that. Probably don't think about it actually. So um, we played a couple rounds here. We entered in the quarterfinals. Let's start there. The Carolina Dynamo, we played and we beat 2-0. They were in the USISL. Um,
Woo.
yeah, it's a mouthful. I was worried about messing that up, but yeah, so we beat them 2-0. There was 1,829 people there, and in Virginia there. So yeah, we beat them. I went on to play the Dallas Burn in the Cotton Bowl, but only in front of 1,958 this time, in
Jeez.
which Jaime Moreno had a brace to beat them 2-0 as well. And then in the final in RFK, which had a little more attendance there at 7,234, which is nice. We won 3-0 against the Rochester Raging Rhinos, which is, yeah, that was interesting to kind
You
of go
gotta
through
love
and,
you gotta love that name.
yeah, no, totally.
But that's interesting. I'm maybe for some personal time after this, now that you kind of pointed me to this, how do you get an Open Cup final between the Rochester Raging Rhinos and DC United? Like, I'm very interested to see how that Open Cup tournament went for Rochester, and how exactly they ended up there, because you don't I, I'd love to know sort of like the last time kind of like a lower league team actually made it to the Open Cup final, because as far as I can remember, it's always been MLS teams facing off.
Yeah, there's been some teams that have done relatively well relatively recently, but they haven't won, in some amount of time. But the Raging Rhinos actually had a pretty good tournament. They beat the Rapids 3-0, and they beat the Mutiny 4-3 in extra time. So I mean, they beat the Mutiny again was top of the Eastern Conference. So that's pretty impressive.
That's fascinating. If only me, and sort of like where my interest is now today in soccer. If I had been around to sort of experience that in '96, I would have just loved to been there for that. So that's just super fascinating stuff. Is there anything else we wanted to talk about regarding that '96 year?
Not specifically, I don't think. But yeah, it's cool that we got a double that year. We won the cup and the Open Cup, so that's interesting. It'd be nice to do something like that again.
Totally. So yeah, we've gone just about an hour on this show. Is there anything you wanted to sort of do as far as shout outs? I know we got a new review for the show. over on iTunes.
Oh yeah, totally. I would love to read this out right now because we said we would, and it's a really nice review. So yeah, I'll just start reading it out. The title is Enjoying the Pod. Letting you know, as a United supporter, I have been enjoying your pod and appreciate the work you do. Thought maybe it might be interesting if you did 5 or 10 minutes each episode on the history of the club. Maybe bios of favorite moments of ex-players or other club history, such as supporter groups or favorite matches. Just an idea. Keep up the good work. Vamos United. Thanks, Brian Lake. And you can find Brian on Twitter at BrianLake12 if you want to follow him. He also posts some cool stuff from United's past. I've seen him post like some of the stuff about his favorite goal and some other things about some of the games he's been at. So yeah, I mean, we really appreciate the review. It helps us, get in front of new people. Again, if you do leave a review though, we will read it out on the show, as long as it's not nasty, I guess I should say.
Right. Yeah. No, and thank you so much, Brian. I'm sure this is a little more than you bargained for, sort of getting the full, or at least a good chunk of that retrospective of 1996 for two people who weren't alive enough to remember it. So, it was super interesting going back and or sort of researching what happened that year and taking a look back at those names. So, love the suggestion about adding that stuff, and that's for sure something we're gonna do. Like I said, there's so much fascinating stuff just in this year alone that to take little bits and pieces and kind of expand on them a little bit is something that would be super fun to do. So love the suggestion. We'll definitely be throwing more of that historical information into the show.
Yeah, no, totally. I have a few stories I'd like to tell at some point. Meeting some of the players. My dad did a few interviews with some of the players that I was present for. Stuff like that. It was, a lot of history there, a lot of stuff that I haven't talked about on this show, but I haven't really, talked to too many people about it because I guess it's not this type of thing I, talk to my coworkers about or anything like that. So, I think that's a really great idea. I'd love to do personal stories, and then obviously for now, I guess we're going to be doing these until I guess the league comes back. And I think this is kind of fun, a nice reflection time, kind of in the same vein as the suggestion in the review.
So yeah, with sort of several weeks to go in sort of like this break in MLS action, that gives us enough time to go through all the championship years. So we can talk about 1997, 1999, and 2004. So I'm super excited to take some deep dives into those years and sort of learn more about this team and hopefully give some more information that helps newcomers understand the history, where this team's come from, and where they're going forward.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think I also want to do an episode on the 2013 year with the Open Cup win and the and the other stuff. Pretty interesting. But yeah, anyway, let's do our final recommendations. Do you want to do yours?
Yeah, so this one, this group kind of, I don't know if this is a person or if this is a group of people or whatever, but they're called the Order of Washington's Regulars, and they just kind of popped up a couple weeks ago for me on Instagram and on Twitter. And they are the unofficial DC United supporters group from the middle of the nation. So definitely in my neck of the woods now. So they're an interesting, like I said, I don't know if this is a single guy or if this is an actual collective, but they have kind of like a punk, ska, reggae, dub sort of influence to them. So like they do a lot of designs and stickers based on old, punk or DC hardcore albums. Like they did a couple Minor Threat references when they were doing, I think, the Colorado Rapids and Inter Miami games, and then they took that classic Rancid album, and Out Came the Wolves, and they had it as "And Out Came the Talons." So, kind of a cool group. What they're doing, they're making some great designs. So I wanted to just shout them out to let people know that they're doing some cool stuff. So on Instagram, you can find them at Order of Washington's Regulars, and that's all one word. And then on Twitter, they're at O Regulars. So just a super cool group, and it appeals to kind of that inner eighth grader in me who went to all the local, hardcore and punk shows with all the, crusty kids wearing their Chuck Taylors and all of that. Like that just appeals to me in a certain way that I just genuinely love. So, super, super happy that I came across this and wanted to tip my hat to them.
Yeah, no, totally. I also followed them. Yeah, I did notice they popped up, and their artwork is pretty cool. Yeah, definitely follow them. The link will be in the description as well, or the show notes, whatever. Cool. This week I wanted to do a little, not too different, I guess a little different thing. This morning I saw that a couple of U.S. internationals are kind of teaming up to support a charity called Feeding America. So I saw, Christian Pulisic, Tyler Adams, and Weston McKennie from the U.S. national teams all posting about, here's a donation link to donate to make sure that people have food. It's a hunger relief charity called Feeding America. You can find them on Twitter at Feeding America, and it's especially rough times, but this could really help people who literally don't have food right now. So check that out. I guess as well as the players' accounts. But you can kind of see their messages as well along with it. They each did a video, so you can find them on Twitter as well or Instagram.
Oh, that's great. That's super. Always like seeing players getting out and helping communities and sort of going and contributing to causes like that, especially during this time where it's very easy to kind of get down in your feelings and whatnot. It's important to look at the impact that people are having. So yeah, those are fantastic suggestions, and not to be too self-promotional or anything like that, but you tossed this my way, but the show got featured on Major League Soccer this week.
Oh yeah, they added us to the list of podcasts and shows under DC United, which was pretty cool. That was that meant a lot to us, so that and this amazing review. It's been a really nice week for the show. I think we keep growing, and the reviews are helping. The retweets on Twitter, everything has just been really good.
That just about does it for me. I've pretty much covered everything I wanted to cover, so I'm excited to jump into 1997 next week.
Yeah, totally. We'll cover the 1997 season, the championship, next week. But until then, please stay safe, stay inside if you can. See you next week.
Peace.